My name is Sergeant Ryan Sanders, and I am the sergeant over the Homeless Resource Center Squad with Salt Lake City Police Department, and I've been with the police department for over 14 years.
My name is Officer Blair Bench. I'm an officer on Sergeant Sanders' Homeless Resource Squad, and I've been with the department for 9 years.
Greg Lovell, and I currently work in public relations.
I'm Jason Johnson. I'm a police officer with Salt Lake City Police Department. I'm currently assigned to the outreach program.
So we work downtown, kind of near the homeless shelter around 700 South State area, and I would say, this problem, we do see it a lot, obviously, in our area, the downtown area, and that's because this fentanyl is more likely to be used by homeless people, and that's one of the reasons they're homeless. And so typically where you see a lot of homeless, you're going to find a lot of fentanyl, and so we see it in the downtown area, as well as we'll see it on the west side, kind of North Temple, 900 West area, around Redwood Road, especially along the Jordan River Trail. That's where there's a lot of dealers at, as well as selling this fentanyl. But yeah, just typically areas where you're going to have a higher homeless concentration, homeless population, is where you're going to see this fentanyl.
In my experience, the drug activity in Salt Lake City has been around the homeless population. I know it's in other places as well. It's really everywhere, but in my experience, I dealt with it mostly around the homeless shelter. And at the time, it's not so much now, but at the time it was a kind of an open air drug market, and a lot of people brought the drugs in and sold them to the people at the homeless shelter in that area.
So as far as the fentanyl issue, it's going to cross all the socioeconomic lines. In my 22 years in this job, the drug addiction itself is usually widespread. Fentanyl specifically, though, a lot of it comes from the opiate addictions, and so you have people from all walks of life who were, for whatever reason, assigned a pain pill, and then that developed into an addiction that translated now to buying these the counterfeit fentanyl pills off the street to feed that addiction.
People's are driven into drug use. There's probably a lot of different circumstances, but when people, I think it starts at a young age, and then as they become addicted and start young, then it's a hard habit to kick, especially fentanyl, because it's such a strong and powerful drug. And so people get addicted to it and then start making bad life choices, and it seems to compound, and then sometimes leads to homelessness, and relationships with their families get cut off. And so yeah, it's really nasty.
I would say it comes in all flavors, I guess you can say. Like, I've not noticed a pattern as far as, these guys are more likely to use it. It's the homeless population can pretty much be anyone. Anyone can get addicted to drugs, if they're not, if they try even one time, like, it can happen. So yeah, I've not noticed any pattern, male, female, or any race.
Fentanyl doesn't target it. It's not specific to any group. It spans everywhere. Like, again, wealthiest to the homeless on the street, everyone in between. There's no race, no religion, doesn't discriminate with gender. It's and I think that's why it's so dangerous, is because it'll sneak up on people who aren't expecting it to cause problems for them either. You're in a family that's in a good middle class neighborhood, and your kids are going to what people believe is a good school, and the next thing you know, somehow they're addicted to this opiate. It attacks everywhere.
Every once in a while, I'm a little surprised when I meet someone out there who's like 18, 19, just because, I don't know if they don't have any family they can stay with or anything like that, but other than that, yeah, it's all ages.
Which, as far as some of these younger ones, it's almost without a doubt that their parents are also drug addicts, and so and that's the reason that they're drugs. They grew up in some bad home, maybe foster kid or something like that, or their parents got them into it.
Starting out as a child, one of the things that you need to be aware of and how you would identify those who are distributing them is pay attention at school of kind of who those people are that are doing that, and then anyone who is experimenting, maybe at parties or other places, I would completely steer away from that, just so you never get caught up in a circumstance where you try one of those drugs and then become addicted.
So with the fentanyl cases, when you stop someone, the quantities of the drugs are one of the first things you're going to notice. A user on fentanyl is going to have the 20 to 30 pills, and when you interview them, they're going to have that. They're going to tell you, no, this is user quantity. Normally, if you've stopped someone and they had 20 or 30 twists of heroin on them, you could pretty much safely assure that they were dealing with that drug. Now with fentanyl and the way it works within the body, people are using so much more of it on a regular basis that it's creating a stronger demand for it, and that stronger demand means there's more money, and so you're seeing more of it coming in, I think.
As far as other cases we've seen, I know the DEA recently reported that they had a record number of seizures of fentanyl last year, where they seized over 2 million fentanyl pills, where previously in 2024 they seized 1 million. And so we're seeing that explosion of fentanyl, and I think it's because it is so highly addictive, and because they're able to get more people addicted to it, basically giving them more customers.
One of the things that I hear from fentanyl users is that they need to use it more often than they do heroin. So they tell me they would use heroin like maybe twice a day, but with fentanyl they have to use it 5-6 times a day, and so it makes it harder on them. They have to constantly be finding money to get drugs, and so in that way it's been worse than heroin, even though it's a similar drug.
Which, like I mentioned, there's some people who use 15, 20 pills a day. But for all we know, that person could also be selling it with having that number of quantity. And so that's kind of like a challenge, like, oh, is this person just using it for personal use, or are they actually selling these pills? So trying to, navigate that can be a challenge sometimes.
We investigate our cases, within the confines of the law, the Fourth Amendment. So a lot of times we have to actually see someone using in order to take action. It's sometimes hard to tell if someone's dealing drugs or they're just handing, something else in between each other, like food or something. So we got those challenges and just do our best.
One of the biggest challenges that we face and from my point of view personally is how it seems like the problem is never ending. No matter how much drugs we pull off the street or how many arrests we make, it seems like there's always more. And so sometimes it can be frustrating as an officer because you feel like you're not always fixing the problem or stopping the problem because it's so prevalent out there.
So some of the bulletins I've reviewed over the years talks about how they experiment with trying to get the high. The dealers don't want to kill you necessarily, but they want to get you the best high, the fastest high, the most intense high, and so they experiment with different things, different chemicals. We saw the same thing with spice a few years back, where they were spraying that stuff with all kinds of weird chemicals to try and replicate a high. And so because you don't know what's going into that stuff, it adds that level of danger to using it.
Yeah, so we'll have people who use, 5, 10, 20 pills a day. And one of the reasons why is because they use the pill and it's a quicker high, and the high is even greater than that of heroin, but then it crashes faster, so it doesn't last as long compared to heroin. And that's why they need to constantly be using these pills. So it ends up costing them more, and they become more addicted due to that high, chasing that high. And then one thing as well with this fentanyl is that there's now starting to put the fentanyl and a lot of the other drugs, such as meth, crack cocaine. Like they'll mix in
Spice.
fentanyl with spice. These other drugs where they think like, oh, I'm not going to become a fentanyl addict, when in reality they are, because those drugs are now being spiked with fentanyl or laced with fentanyl in it.
So fentanyl's changed the drug landscape in that we went from the traditional street drugs of heroin, crack, meth, to a lot of hybrid drugs. So you have fentanyl being introduced and being laced in with other drugs. So dealers are lacing cocaine or crack with fentanyl. The downside and the real negative side to that is if somebody doesn't know that they're taking fentanyl, they don't know to take precautions for it. So they might accidentally overdose thinking that they're just trying to smoke a crack cocaine, and instead they end up overdosing on fentanyl that they didn't even know was in the drugs that they were using.
I think everyone on the street knows that the counterfeit pills are fentanyl. They're not like being tricked into taking what they think is an Oxycontin or something. I think everyone knows that those are fentanyl, but we are seeing more and more of the fentanyl powder, which it can be used on its own, or I assume it can be mixed in with other drugs and in order to lace those drugs.
So medically, it can be prescribed as a patch that they give to you as a pain control measure for significant pain. But the most common way we're going to see fentanyl on the street is going to be on the counterfeit M30 pills. So they make it look like an oxy pill, and then if you stop somebody and they've got a prescription bottle and they've got the pills in it, it's a way for them to try and disguise the fact that they have that fentanyl on them. But most of the time, we're just finding those counterfeit pills.
One thing I wish the public knew is we often hear of how like marijuana is the gateway drug. One thing I want to add to that is actually prescription pills, because a lot of these drug addicts, I would ask them like, hey, how did you become addicted to heroin or fentanyl? And it was very common for them to say, oh, I got injured, I was prescribed prescription pills, like pain pills. They then became addicted to the pain pills, which then in turn led them to be addicted to heroin. So just being super careful if you do receive a prescription for pain pills, because in some cases that can lead to them wanting to use heroin or fentanyl. And so from my own personal experience, I saw that to be the case, where that is what led them down that path of becoming a drug addict, is abusing prescription pills.
The bulk of the people I've talked to get introduced to it through some sort of prescription, an injury. So the high school kid that has a bad back from playing football, the housewife who had knee surgery and got prescribed the opiate, that prescription is kind of that entryway into the fentanyl addiction, and it usually progresses from the pills. The pills become hard to obtain, so they seek that same high from the street. Maybe they went to heroin, maybe they don't like heroin because it's got a connotation about it. So maybe they'll see those blue M30 pills. Well, those pills look a lot like the ones they were taking that they were addicted to originally, so it makes it easy for them to use, because you're not injecting that into your veins, you're not smoking it necessarily initially, you're just ingesting it just like you would that prescription medication. And again, it slowly sneaks up on you and becomes an issue.
I wish that the community and parents everywhere understood just how addictive and dangerous fentanyl and really all the hard drugs are. They're very addictive and dangerous, and once people get caught in that trap, it's a very difficult road back, and it can ruin your professional life and your relationships, and it's just a difficult path to start down. So I would hope that everyone would do everything in their power to stop our young people from being exposed to any of the hard drugs.
So the addiction prevention component is probably the biggest thing. If you get prescribed an opiate, take it as prescribed, and minimally, don't try to use other methods for pain control, whether it's homeopathic stuff like ice and compression, if it's Tylenol and ibuprofen and some of the other over-the-counter ways to deal with your pain, physical therapy, whatever method other than those pills is going to be better for you. Any unused pills, bring them to the receptacles. Police stations, pharmacists, they all have receptacles for your unused medications. Get rid of them. Get them out of the house. And then as far as signs of the addiction, if you're looking at family members, it'll usually manifest itself in some behavioral changes. People will just act differently from what you're used to. You're not going to see them in the same way. A lot of times they start stealing from their family members and people who are close to them. Pay attention to those signs, because if you can get to the addiction early and deal with it early, I think you probably have a better chance of recovery.
One of the cases that I had not too long ago in relation to the hard substances was I had a guy that was hallucinating and set his own car on fire and then tried to break into his neighbor's home using a sword. And so you never know what you're going to get from some of these things. Like I don't know exactly how it works on your brain, but people act different depending on how much of one drug or another they take, and it can be very frightening, both and dangerous, both for the public and for the police that deal with them, and for also the user. So it's it's a lot of messed up circumstances from the use of drugs.
I would say just simply arresting someone for having possession, like if there's nothing else to it, they're just going to be back on the street probably later that day, and know that is not going to stop them from using it again. What it can do though is put them on certain lists, such as like being a high utilizer or requiring them to participate in drug court as part of like terms of their release. And so being part of those different programs is what may lead to them becoming clean. Still very difficult to become clean from fentanyl, just due to the nature of that drug. But in my experience though, just simply getting arrested isn't enough. It needs more than that.
So I spent most of my time in investigations as a detective. I worked a lot. Most of that time was also in violent crime. And so a lot of the motives for the crimes that I was investigating was based on drug use. And over the last few years in investigations, it was fentanyl specifically. And so it was a major motivator for a lot of the other crimes that we see, car break-ins, robberies, and that such.
When you arrest someone for fentanyl use or fentanyl possession, like Sergeant Sanders said, they usually don't get held in jail for very long, and what they really need is a time away from the drug to come down off it, or to what's the word? Go through withdrawals,
Yeah.
until they don't have that sickness that they get when they're not using drugs.
Consequences to having consequences to a problem such as drug use or selling or buying drugs is important. I don't think it is a fix all. I think we have to combat it from many different angles, through the criminal justice system, maybe through social workers or the medical fields. But I think we all need to work together as a team to be able to tackle that. Maybe the education as well.
I'm shocked at how often the drugs, fentanyl specifically, becomes the motive for a lot of violence in the city, the robberies and people just trying to get easy money to feed that habit. I'm also shocked at how quickly somebody's personality is changed by the addiction, and how they can go from somebody who was a compassionate, caring family member to somebody who now is robbing from their family and stealing from their family to feed this addiction, with no care, no concern, no empathy for anyone that they might be hurting that stands in their way of getting their next high. It's just a very powerful illness, I guess, is the only way I could really describe it.
I mean, because some of the examples I've seen, like back when I was working on Rio Grande on bikes, I literally watched, a mom leave her, she just gave birth to her baby, literally left the hospital, like literally hours later to go buy drugs at the shelter. And I ended up arresting her as her newborn baby, which was in NICU because of drug use, was being left to the hospital. She was going to jail. So if a person is willing to like leave their newborn child to go get their fix for drugs, just simply taking them to jail is not enough to like, oh no, I'm gonna get arrested. That is not a deterrence of them, wanting to stop doing drugs.
As far as the legal processes, after we're done with the case, detectives and prosecutors take a look at it. Sometimes they'll offer the offender like a plea deal and it never goes to court. Sometimes they make them promise to go into treatment or have different things that they're supposed to do. So sometimes it goes to court and they get a sentence passed down and sometimes it doesn't.
Typically, to differentiate between whether someone needs resources or maybe needs to go through the process kind of depends on, in my experience, depends on the situation that they're in. If they're caught selling or using the drugs, usually we have to, we don't always have to go to jail. Sometimes it's only a citation, but every case is different, right? Depending on who you're dealing with and how many times you've dealt with them or what their circumstances are. And I think especially for me, people who are willing to look into other resources and want to stop the drug use or stop the their habit, those are the ones that are easier for officers to reach out and find other ways to get them help. A lot of people don't have desire to change, or at least not in the moment when they deal with us.
My experience has been that it's very subject dependent. Each individual has their own rock bottom when it comes to the addiction. For some, that arrest is that wake up call, and then they'll try and seek help after that. For a lot of them, that's not the case. The drug just has too strong of a hold over them. I know that when I would go to the jail to do interviews with people who have been arrested for different crimes, I usually tried to wait until they had a chance to detox and get some of that poison out of their brain. They're different people when they're still high or going through the withdrawals from when they've gone through the withdrawals and they're on the backside. When you talk to them at that point, they're people who have hopes, dreams, they want to plan for their future. They're not plotting criminal activity at that point. They just want to go and be normal people doing normal things again. But it's that time period where they have to suffer through that withdrawal before they start thinking clearly again. So those are usually, to me, that would be where, if you make that arrest, that's when you introduce the resources to them so that we can maybe at that point in the arrest get them to change their mind and want them to go, and I think they'll be more successful if we introduce the resources at that point. In some cases, I think initially people might be just thinking they're just going to mess around with the drugs and don't believe that it's going to impact them in this way. Again, other people, I think it starts out with that prescription pill. Ultimately, what happens is once you take that pill, once you take that dose, that first dose, your body starts to crave that, and it wants that again and again. And each time you take it, you can't replicate it in the same way. And so you either take higher doses to try and get that same feeling, or more often. It's not something that I think people choose to do. You don't just choose to do years of fentanyl. It's especially when you consider how many of them end up homeless on the streets and in the living conditions that they're on, and it's simply because of that addiction. People don't choose to live like that. that's altered brain chemistry. That's not a conscious decision.
In regards to like what we do for harm reduction programs, we specifically don't have any play in those type of organizations, because there are certain organizations out there or businesses that go out and will pass out different kits, to try to keep them safe, such as, Narcan or naloxone, or even there's people that'll pass out like clean like syringes, like a needle exchange program. So we don't ever participate in those type of programs. The one thing we do though is we have department social workers where we offer resources. So they're through Salt Lake City Police Department. They're employed by the department, and we offer resources on most of the calls we go on. We'll talk to them, see if they do want to get clean. And if they do, we'll call department social workers down there to come talk to them and get those resources to them.
So as far as the harm reduction strategies, the police department will have the naloxone and the Narcan, that first responder responsibility to try and save lives. That's mainly what our goal is going to be. The criminal investigation component plays a role in that as well, trying to get the drugs off the street. It's other partners that are going to do the harm reduction. We have social workers and our homeless outreach folks that are able to, within the city, that are able to go into these populations that are impacted the most, offer the help, team effort kind of thing. But as far as the police department itself and the officers specifically in the harm reduction side, it's more of what can we do to immediately save a life and then reduce the chance of somebody having the drugs on them.
Yeah, I think people change after using controlled substances such as fentanyl. I don't think people start out wanting to steal from friends and neighbors, and then pretty soon they'll be stealing from grandmas, grandpas, and anyone to get the money to get their high for the day. And so I don't think they start out with that frame of mind, but the addiction kind of takes over, and you'll do anything for that addiction, which is really sad.
Some of the impact I've seen is just, literally anyone can become addicted. I've, arrested a lot of people who weren't even homeless, that they would simply just come down to the area of like the homeless shelter looking for dealers to buy, and some of them had houses, they weren't even homeless. I remember specifically there was a lady who brought her grandkids down to the shelter to buy drugs. Like she left her grandkids in the car, went and bought drugs and came back, and when we arrested her, like the drugs were like at the feet of where like, the grandkid was sitting. So it's pretty disturbing, some of the stuff you'd see that just people just not care because they're so just focused on using those drugs, and it's pretty sad.
I think the saddest thing for me is every human being has dignity and worth and freedom, and I think that the drugs kind of take away some of their freedom, because it's almost like they're enslaved to the addiction, and you see them, and you know that they could have had a different life. They could have had dreams or hobbies, things that they want to do besides sitting on the side of the road doing drugs, and that's sad.
Every officer has a story. What I find fascinating is again, it doesn't matter who you are or what your family background is. This drug will impact you in some way, shape, or form. It's not going to target poor. It's not going to target you based on race. It's not going to target you. You can be the wealthiest individual and still suffer from this drug in some way, shape, or form. You can be homeless on the streets and be suffering from this drug, and everything in between.
Every one of us knows someone who's been affected by drug use. Like every one of us has a family member, a distant friend, a relative who, has, was a drug addict or has been affected by it. I know me personally, my brother-in-law, he died of an overdose from heroin use, as well as I had another brother who, like my own personal brother, who went to jail for drug use. And so it definitely hits close to home for me where, I see what it can do to a family as far as affecting them, because it literally does tear away their life, by being addicted to that. It's a disease to them.
I was in the Army, and a lot of the guys that I served with came home, got discharged, and a lot of them got into drug use, and there have been suicides and overdoses. As far as here in the community, we get calls quite often from parents asking us if we've seen their children out in the community, if we see them, can we have them call their mom or their dad, things like that. So we know it affects families pretty hard.
With fentanyl, it doesn't take a lot. I've heard some people describe as just enough that fits on the tip of a pin. The pinhead is enough to be a lethal dose. The other aspect of it is you don't know what else is in it, right? So it might be fentanyl, it might be carfentanil, which is even more potent. So there's other drugs that might be mixed into it. So it doesn't take a lot to become a fatal dose, and that's the scary part. Some of these pills, some of the stuff that goes into them, it might just be baking soda and some other things that are used as filler, but it might also be other toxic chemicals, rat poison and such like that people are, when they make these pills and put them in the press, they're adding to it to create that pill.
So we've also started carrying Narcan to help people when they go unconscious from the effects of fentanyl and other opiates.
Yeah, we do carry Narcan or naloxone to administer to people who look like they could be overdosing or dying from a fentanyl overdose. And as far as our own safety, like officer safety, we've been trained to avoid, touching it with our bare hands, inhaling it, and just try and protect ourselves that way.
Which, every officer carries Narcan for that reason in case, an officer were to overdose on it, as well as our evidence room has a Narcan that's sitting right there for any officer to use just in case. So and there has been emails and training sent out on proper handling of fentanyl as well as other illegal drugs.
So about the time it really started to become a big issue, we, as a department, started issuing out the naloxone nasal sprays. We were seeing a dramatic increase in the number of overdoses on the street, and that Narcan kit was great for us to be able to administer immediately when we run across somebody who's exposed and suffering from an overdose. But it also meant that we had to make sure that we had the drug for us as well, to protect us in case we had an unintentional exposure. We have to be very careful with our personal protective equipment, our gloves, mask. It changes the way we test for the drugs. In the past, you could just use a little sample in the field test kits and get an immediate result. Now we have to be a little bit more careful about how we're testing the drugs before we book them in for evidence. So for a while there, we weren't even doing the field tests. We were just packaging them up and sending them to the state lab so that they could safely handle the drugs at the state lab, as opposed to us trying to manipulate some of the stuff out on the street, especially the powder form.
But if you open up a bag that's got fentanyl powder in it, it can go airborne, and then you can ingest that way inadvertently. So that's where the masks come in. I personally have had, when trying to test, this was heroin, but the old way we did it, we had to use, I had to get a sample of the heroin and then put it in the tester, and we had a little straw that we used to manipulate it, and I accidentally dug into and flicked it, and it hit me in the eye, and so I had to go through a medical procedure to make sure that I wasn't affected by it. But ever since then, I'm anytime I use or deal with any kind of drugs, eye protection is very important. We've had to start using personal protection equipment a little bit more, especially when fentanyl first came on, because it was so much powerful than other opiate drugs. And so, I mean, we've always used gloves, but since then we've started using gloves and a mask and glasses as much as possible, just to protect ourselves from potential inadvertent exposures.
So obviously there's a safety aspect to it, to avoid unintentional exposure to the fentanyl. So now when we package the drugs and they want us to have a partner with us, so that if one of us is exposed, the other one can administer Narcan if necessary, and then call for help. Some of the other things too is the overdoses that come from them become a little bit complex. I know that in my experience working with the U.S. Attorney, they have pushed their ability to investigate and take people to court for providing the drugs that have resulted in an overdose death. But those cases are really tough to investigate. They're not, it's not a traditional homicide case where you're looking at a motive and this is a drug dealer who's providing drugs to someone and then they've been overdosed. And trying to trace that drug back to the dealers becomes a really difficult task.
Okay, so what do we do with pills or drugs we find on the street? So we take them straight from the scene to our evidence room at our police station, and we book it into evidence under that case number, the related case.
And eventually they get disposed of or destroyed. I'm not sure if they burn them or they crush them or what, but the department disposes of them.
I feel like police officers and police departments everywhere need to constantly be informing the public and allowing them to understand what it is that we're trying to do and how we do it, and do that constantly so that they can understand why we do what we do, so that there is trust. Sometimes people only perceive part of what police officers do and then make judgment based on that. But if they understood the background of what we're doing and why we're doing it and what our goal is, then I think that builds trust with the public.
I've been able to work in outreach for the last 6 months now, and I've been really excited with how well the community has embraced us and our efforts. Like, they really want us working hard to address these issues. They see the side effects, because the drug use itself is one thing, but the addiction then causes that desire to continue feeding it. And so that generates all the other crimes, the vehicle break-ins, the burglaries, the robberies, assaults. All of those things can be motivated by the drug addiction itself. And so the community wants us to address this, because I think there's an understanding that the drug use is motivating a lot of these other crimes that are going on. You know, if you're addicted to a drug, you're not going to be able to hold down a job. You just can't. And so to get money to pay for the drug, you're going to break into a car, steal from your family. It's all these crimes are motivated by achieving the money so that you can continue financing that drug habit. A lot of the low-level dealers that we've handled and dealt with they're addicts themselves, right? So they're selling drugs in order to finance a drug habit. And so if you're trying to avoid people who are potentially going to provide you with these drugs, stay away from the addicts that could potentially be trying to sell you the drugs. But yeah, the low-level offenders, almost all of them are going to be the user that's trying to make a little money to feed his own addiction.
A lot of the dealers, low-level dealers he's talking about, are also homeless themselves, and it's hard to track down where they are going for their supply.
Yeah, you have like these low-level dealers, and occasionally, also back in my time on working down Rio Grande, is you would see like some like homeless people being used to sell some of these drugs, and they'll give them like here's a twist a day to go sell or hold drugs for me. And so yeah, occasionally homeless people are used for it, but then usually it's going back to some of the people that we'd find, who came over here illegally to sell some of the drugs, they would literally get here and be basically, hey, you're going here, this is where you're selling, and then they'd be put up in an apartment, and they would then start selling, and they'd only been here for like a few days, So that was one of the patterns I used to see as well.
I think it changes all the time. I think when law enforcement goes and starts going after one group, whoever the manufacturers of the cartels probably switch to someone else. Because I just remember when I first started here 9 years ago, a lot of the dealers were like immigrants, and now I don't seem to see that quite as much, but it's hard to tell sometimes.
Yeah, a lot of the flow that comes in through Utah is from the cartel, just because Utah is kind of the crossroads of the West, and so you'll see a lot of drugs getting transported through Utah, and of course some of it stops here. But yeah, a lot of it does come from the cartel. I just know, like, in regards to drugs and the homeless population, a lot of people think like, oh, homeless are just down on their luck, which no, that is most always not the case. They're not homeless due to high house prices. Like, there's many times where we'll give them a free housing and I'll still find them out on the street. And many people, even if, say, a house right now is $500,000, even if we drop the house price down to $50,000, this homeless person only has, a few pennies in their pocket. They can't afford either house. So them being homeless has nothing to do with house prices. It has everything to do with them being addicted to illegal substances or mental illness. That is what's causing them to, be on the street and to be living in those conditions. And so helping this homeless person is we need to first address the root cause, which is, their addiction and their mental illness.
I would like the public to know that we want people to get the resources they need to get off drugs, but most people are not ready to use those resources voluntarily. Like, they need an authority of some kind that's going to force them to go to, some type of a recovery, or if they're just left on the street to do their own thing, they're going to keep on doing whatever they can to get more drugs until they kind of hit rock bottom, I guess, and they don't have any other options.
Oh, to add to that, like, I remember back when I was on Rio Grande, there was a job fair that they held, like, for all the homeless people on Rio Grande. And I remember talking to the organizer at the end of the fair, and he said he had one person come by the entire 8 hours, looking for a job. So a lot of people who are homeless, they're what we call resource resistant, where they're not looking to get clean. They're not looking to get a job or a house. Because for them, it's a lot easier for them to just lay and sleep in a park all day and get high all day as they get, free food and whatever, free to them. Because it's a lot harder work to go out and try to get clean, to try to go maintain a job, to go get an apartment. That's a lot more work than just, I'm just going to lay here in the park for 10 hours and go get my drugs. So that's, I guess, one thing I want to make sure people know. If you're trying to help them, giving them money does not help them. Giving them a bunch of free stuff does not help them. Holding them responsible and accountable for their actions and trying to get them clean and offer resources is what will help them.
As far as misconceptions, all the officers I've worked with have an actual passion for wanting to help people. It's not about the arrest. It's not about the stat. It's not about how much drugs we seize. Really, it comes down to helping the individual that we're dealing with at that moment. And I see a lot of officers really wanting to focus efforts on getting people better and getting them off the drugs. I mean, that would, again, if the drugs are the main motivation for a lot of our crime, and we could solve that issue, that would free up officers to do a whole host of other things that we just don't have time to deal with because we're dealing with some of these more major offenses. And so I think officers understand that we just want to get people better.
I know like homelessness has increased year after year. I don't know the exact percentage, but like every year, like we have more homeless people. And so clearly what we're doing is not working. It needs to be adjusted. We need to look at other places that have seen success in lowering their homeless population. And I think a lot of it has to do with, obviously we've had double the amount of fentanyl pills seized this past year. And so slowing the drug flow into the state will help that. So, but as far as like if we'll see an increase, I mean, that's kind of out of our hands. That's up to whatever the state homeless board and and how they're able to tackle that problem.
Like where we see Salt Lake in the next 5 years, it kind of depends on the policymakers and the choices they make. I think that one state or one municipality can't do it alone. There needs to be like a national strategy to do this, because we see people that come here from other states all the time. So if there's resources here and there's not resources in other states, it'll just attract more people here. So there needs to be like a national policy strategy for homeless people.
I think, especially with the fentanyl use, there's a lot of blame. Like, you knew how dangerous it was and you still chose to use drugs. So, but what I think a lot of people don't understand is how the opiate addiction a lot of times starts with that prescription. That the physician gives you a prescription for whatever pain issue you're dealing with, which then turns to the addiction that gets worse and worse and worse and evolves into the fentanyl addiction. Just remember that these addictions occur and happen to anyone. So it could be your neighbor, it could be your family member. It's best not to judge anyone and focus on maybe just a little bit of compassion and getting them help and getting them off these drugs, whatever that's going to look like.
Something that I would like teens to know relation to drugs. I tell my family and friends, stay away from it. There is absolutely no reason to become addicted to these substances, because they're so dangerous in so many different ways, and they will really quickly ruin your life if you get caught up in it. It's a bad thing. So I always just tell everyone, just steer clear. There's other ways to have fun, and drugs is definitely not one of them.
Just don't start. There's nothing safe about it. It's not a game. It's your first time might be your last time. I mean, it's not worth the risk. Talk to your kids a lot. Talk to them all the time about it. Warn your kids. Don't let them be influenced by friends. Don't let them be influenced by anything other than you. Make sure that you're warning them about the dangers all the time, as often as you can.
As far as like scholarly research, I'm sure there's lots of scholars doing this, but just going down and talking to the users themselves, they're going to have a different perspective than I will. So that would be really good. That's one thing I would do a lot too, is I would talk to them like, hey, how did you become addicted? Have you tried quitting? What's it like? Just, because obviously, we've never used drugs, so we're only going by off what we see. It's good to, actually get their first-hand account of stuff.
And keep on researching to see if there's other ways. And I know sometimes people will use prescription drugs, and that can be abused just as well. And so I think overprescribing could be a dangerous thing going into the future, as it is currently. But limiting that, or finding ways to limit that part of the drug problem, I think is important.